Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland, and this week's co-host is Sonny Messiah-Jiles. Welcome again, Sonny.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to the topic we have for today.
Always a pleasure to have you. This week's subject is the Census 2020, and you're probably wondering why is that important. Hopefully after you view the show, you will understand why. And to explain that, we have two guests in order. Jeff Reichman, who is a principal of January Advisors, and Jerry Wood, who is a leader in Erase the Count initiative. So welcome to both of you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
And the first question is, why should anybody care about the census?
Well, I think everybody should care about the census because it's so important. It's a constitutional mandate, so it's required in the Constitution to count every person living in the United States, and so much depends upon an accurate census. All sorts of federal funding, Medicaid, CHIP, food stamps, all of our social safety net is tied to the census count. And if we don't get that count right, it could mean the loss of millions of dollars, potentially billions of dollars for our state.
Okay.
And it has everything to do with representation in government. It has to do with the apportionment of the Congress. So Texas should be gaining 3 congressional districts at least, maybe 4, depending on how well we do at counting all Texans. In addition to that, all of those districts have to be made exact in population, and that requires really good information on the census. We've been doing this for a long time with single-member districts, and we are still learning how to do it right.
Well, I guess the follow-up question, because you talked about redistricting, is, and related to that, how do we ensure that we actually get an accurate count? What are the factors that we should be looking for to make sure that that happens?
Well, there's a variety of factors. I think that the way in which Houston is approaching it is trying to engage all of the grassroots organizations that are already working with the hard-to-count populations and spreading the message of why the census is important as soon as possible. We're still a year away from the actual census, but it's never too early to start socializing the idea and getting people involved in terms of how to count them, how to fill out the census, and why it's important.
It's a layering. You have the general message that gets out to most people who are engaged, the people who are registered to vote and vote. Then you have to deal with the people who are not really engaged, that might be registered to vote. Then you have to deal with people who are not registered to vote, the people who perhaps don't speak English. You have to have all of the different layers in order to make sure that you count everybody. It's really, a lot of this is the opposite of a political campaign. A political campaign, you're going and you're finding the people who are registered to vote and are going to vote. This is the people who don't even know how to register to vote.
The hidden people.
Absolutely.
Right. But also, when you look at the impact of the census, and it's political, yes. You know, if you look at, it's going to determine the congressional lines, it's going to determine state legislature, city council, school board, and then on the money side, it's going to, as you said earlier, Medicaid, school lunch program, veterans programs, the whole list of things. So how is the census in 2020 different from the way the census has been in other years?
You want to take this one?
Well,
I want to hear from both of y'all.
Yeah. It's very different.
the answer that everyone can agree on is that there's going to be a cyber component, that people will be able to answer the census online. The part that's perhaps more contentious is that we are in a contentious atmosphere in the United States today, and everything has become politicized and partisanized, and that's a new word. So the census inevitably is and will be subject to the same process, and that's not a process that encourages people to participate.
Well, traditionally, if you go back in history, and of course, we've been around for a while, at least the three of us. You maybe not so much. People would go door to door. They would interview people in their homes. Is that going to happen this time, or is that gone?
It's not gone entirely, but
yeah, it's still going to happen, but that's very expensive. Dispatching people to knock on doors costs a lot of money, and the census is perennially underfunded. So what they're hoping for is that people will respond online, but not everybody has a computer or a smartphone. Not everybody feels comfortable filling it out online. You get a postcard in the mail and it says go to a website, whatever. So they're hoping to reduce some of those enumeration costs of knocking on doors, But ultimately, with all of these other political kind of rocks in the road being thrown in there with the citizenship question and answering online, we don't quite know how this is going to play out, but it might not be good.
It was 1970 when they first started having mail. Before that, it was enumeration.
Right.
And I remember filling it out for my family because that's which kid I was. And
Yeah.
Wow.
How much money does your family make? Yeah, he didn't answer.
what can I tell you? As we get to the point we're now online, we also have the census allows members of a family as young as 14 to fill out the census. So it may be that one of our great hopes is to be able to reach the kids who are in high school and convince them that this is something that they need to do, it's important for them to do, and get them enthusiastic about it. And that's part of what the initiative that we're trying to
But you mentioned
pursue.
mail. So are they going to be mail-in forms to people too?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're gonna mail too.
Okay, so I was going to ask on the internet.
Yeah, 'cause I'm
my
got-
experience with dealing with the internet, not always great. I know you can vote for the All-Star team for baseball and the NBA on the internet. You can vote as many times as you want. So is that what we're going to have with internet citizenship? People are or census are going to be able to go online and enter as many times as they want because we're trying to help Texas because the bigger numbers mean we're going to do better. Is that what we're talking
Help
about?
me.
Well, all your answers are keyed into your address. So the address is really the unique identifier in the Census Bureau. So it's really important that Harris County and the City of Houston have a comprehensive list of all of their addresses and that the Census Bureau has that. That in and of itself is a huge challenge given our growth over the last 10 years.
We don't have that, do we?
Well, we've been working on it, but we
Continue to
do
work
have
on
it.
it.
But the issue
it's not
also,
perfect.
when you open this up to internet, you're talking about cyber issues, whether it's foreign or domestic. You're talking about IT failures. I mean, you've even got weather issues that people are moving. And we look at the fact that a lot of folks like myself were hit by Hurricane Harvey. You got displaced folks, you got disinformation campaign, you got all this risk going on top of the threat of, not just threat, people saying and predicting already it's going to be an undercount. How do you fix this? Where are we going? I mean, it's almost like it's the black hole we're going into.
It's difficult. It's a very, very challenging situation, made even more challenging, as to Jerry's point, by the political climate. The way in which this is fixed is exactly what he's saying, is unique and innovative ideas for propagating the message of the census and why it's important for you in particular to fill it out. And it's different for everybody else, but the census is so pervasive and it affects so many things that all of these grassroots organizations have to figure out what it means to me in order to fill out the census.
It's also important to business. Businesses use census information in a lot of what they plan. And it is vital to them to have accurate and believable data as well. It's something that's used in so many different ways. It's not just the governmental, it's not just federal aid. It really is something that allows researchers to have a baseline to understand the society at that moment and make predictions and projections based on that.
Do we have any example of around the country, if you look back in 2010 census, that other areas of the country did a better job of finding all the people to count
Like
than
best
we did?
practices
Right.
almost?
Yeah.
Well, yes. One of the ways in which you get an inkling as to whether you're getting a good count is the mail response. And so, for instance, in 2010, I worked with the city at that time specifically to try and increase the mail response in Houston. And then when we saw where we were not getting good mail response, send in people to try and increase the response to the follow-up. So mail response, we did a better job in 2010 than we had in 2000. This has been a problem for a long time. In 58, the Chamber of Commerce had a big celebration for the millionth Houstonian. In the 60 census, we were at 937,000. We were 62,000 short 2 years later. So undercounting is not a new thing. It's something that we have always been struggling with. But we're learning how to do it better with the outreach that we did in 2010. But we have to have that much more.
Is there a particular problem that we have of a certain group of people that just don't want to participate in the census?
Absolutely. There's known undercount segments. Harris County has a lot of those segments in disproportionate amounts. So renters, in particular are unlikely to be counted. Latinx, people of color, children under 5. The list kind of goes on and on into all of these different communities. But it's really important when you look at all of this together, oftentimes people belong to several undercount segments all at once. I might be a Latinx family with 3 children under 5 years old. So ultimately, in this political climate, the biggest threat to the undercount is the citizenship question.
Some people actually don't think to include their babies.
Just that's educational.
Well, the form only has so many slots.
Really?
Sometimes.
But also sometimes people think, oh, well, we get the kids and they forget the baby. I mean, really, seriously, it is that unexpected, the ways in which...
Maybe they should call Child Protective Services.
But the financial impact of this, I know in reading some of the statistics, it's something like if 1% of Harris County is not counted, it's going to cost us $54 million a year?
About that, yeah. These are estimates, but it's true because all of this comes in terms of federal aid to Harris County and the city of Houston.
It's all based on numbers.
It's all based on numbers. Medicaid uses a calculation that takes into account the census numbers. CHIP does the same thing. So if we have a 1% undercount, which was the national undercount, now keep in mind that some places have an overcount. Some places, especially for white people, have an overcount.
You mean like New York and California where they clean up?
Well, places where, my kid is in college and he's counted at home. So, there can be an overcount. So Houston and Texas, we use the 1% undercount number to calculate those things, but we suspect that the undercount is even more pronounced because we are not an Anglo majority city.
Yep. Multiple people with multiple homes. There's overcounting of that. I love the opportunity to have an overcount of 3 where you have parents with a shared custody and the kids counted at school and they both count the kid at theirs.
Wow.
Oh, that's interesting. You did mention, I did want to ask this.
Yeah, okay.
You mentioned the citizenship question. That's now going to the Supreme Court from the district court that said you couldn't do it, and the Supreme Court said they're going to hear it, which they should, so the census can get out on time. Why is there a fear that if there's some optional or a question on the questionnaire, are you a citizen or not, that people think that somehow means that our ineffective immigration and naturalization service is going to do something about it?
Well, it doesn't really matter whether or not they will do something about it. It matters how people's attitudes feel about it. And I think that our current political climate stokes that fire. And unfortunately, what that means for Harris County, 1 in 3 Harris County residents lives with a non-citizen, whether it's an undocumented immigrant or it's a documented immigrant, somebody who's here legally. What that means is 1 in 3 households has something at stake. Even if it's just a small little fear in the back of your head that you're trying to chase away, why risk it?
And it's more than fear. You also have people who will see that and say, well, I'm not a citizen, I'm apparently not supposed to answer this. They may think of themselves as being disqualified from answering. They've got a green card. They're perfectly legal.
And the census counts both, which is a misunderstanding by some people.
Census counts everybody. In my 1970 census report for Houston, it had special census tracts for each of the ships in the Houston Ship Channel at wharves to count the sailors from other countries who were in port at that time. It counts everybody. And so, but you get a question about citizenship and people start going, oh, well, that's not for me. I'm not supposed to be answering this census.
Well, I guess the point made by people who believe it should be in the census is, wouldn't it be nice to know how many people are in the country illegally, undocumented, because we don't have a clue, to be honest. We have no idea.
But the question
except
doesn't
it's going
answer
up
that.
every day.
But
That's the
the
only
question
thing
doesn't
know.
answer that question. If
Really
we want to
doesn't.
It tells
know
you who the citizens are, which then you can extrapolate from the others that they're not citizens.
But there's plenty of non-citizens who are here legally.
Right.
And
so maybe that should be another question. Are you a citizen? Are you in the country legally? Or none of the above?
the other thing to note is that the census doesn't just operate once every 10 years. They operate the American Community Survey every year, which is a sampling. And they do ask the citizenship question there. So while it's great to have a huge data set that tells us who's a citizen and who's not, from a data standpoint, I love it. I love it. But from an effective study and an effective implementation standpoint, it doesn't work. We're going to have an undercount
Well, you know
as a
what?
result.
We
Yeah,
may
but-
see what happens if the Supreme Court says it comes in.
Well, even if it comes in, the fact of the matter, when you look at Texas, we have a large Hispanic community here. And the reality is you need to count it just in order to get the federal dollars or the political power that actually exists here. Some people are positioning this whole census piece as a civil rights issue. Is that the right way to push it? Why and why not?
I don't know, but I do think that any Texan who believes in the citizenship question is cutting off their nose to spite their face, because we're all on Team Texas here. We want to get as big a count as possible to maximize our political power, to maximize our federal reimbursement, to make sure that we are represented properly.
Is there any statistical sampling that is done with the census that results in the totals for Texas going up or going down?
I don't
No,
understand.
they've rejected
mean,
statistical
so they're not gonna
sampling
do
for
that.
No, they don't adjust for that. They do.
You know, we know we're going to
They
miss
wait.
2%, so we'll just add 2%.
Oh, no.
They will do some extrapolation at that last mile, but the census is very, very accurate, and ultimately their error rate is very slim.
The extrapolation, though, is going to be based on we weren't able to get a response.
Right.
Not we think that we're missing 2%, and so we're just going to up the numbers 2%.
Right.
They're going to, for instance, in an apartment complex, we only got half of the apartments answered the door or responded by mail. We can extrapolate what the remaining.
Well, would they go
apartments are.
interview the landlord and say, what is your vacancy rate?
Sure, that kind of
If
thing.
it's 5%, you only heard from 40 of the people.
Right.
So you got another 45% or 50%, 55% actually, that we could count that we just didn't talk to, but they're in these apartments, and you got to assume there are at least 2 people in the apartment. Would that be an example of sampling?
That would be an example of extrapolation as opposed
Okay.
to sampling.
Because you can't really, I mean, we don't have the manpower to go to every apartment.
No,
I mean, it just
costs
takes too
much
long.
too. But the other thing that's been mentioned is the impact it's going to have on the state, not just Houston and Harris County. You were talking earlier about some of the factors that may have a balance of power that shifts in Texas. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, okay, so there's 31 senators and 150 state reps in the state of Texas, and that's set. The number of members of Congress rises as our population rises faster than the United States in the apportionment process. So the set ones are constantly going up as our population rises. If Harris County doesn't grow as fast as the rest of Texas, Harris County is going to lose representation in Austin. We can grow tremendously, and we have grown, and we will grow tremendously, and yet we can still fall behind because we're not growing as fast as the rest of the state of Texas. So it's important for it's important for any state rep in Harris County to be trying to get people to answer the census, because his district or her district might be out the door in 2021, and that's a simple mathematical process, because the Harris County state rep districts are self-contained in Harris County.
Is there a way for the Census Bureau to know who actually has responded in their database?
Yes. Yeah, they do.
Okay.
They do track
Well,
that.
I got a perfect idea.
But they don't release that for 70 years.
I understand, but I was going to say,
but it's
you
by-
want to get
it's
people.
by address.
Why do people participate? Giveaways. So what they ought to do, we in Texas, we want people to participate in Harris County.
Give 'em
We should say if
something.
you participate, you fill in your census form, you get an entry to get a new car. We're going to give away 10 new cars to everyone who participate. People will be encouraged to do it. Actually, it's a good idea.
In 2010,
Maybe
we
the car
actually-
dealers would donate it because it could help get more people here and help their business.
In 2010, we actually
Gave stuff away.
we had radio promotions where
Okay.
we were giving
There you go.
vouchers for, I think,
But not
some sort of-
cars. Cars are
groceries.
different.
No, that was
Cars
more
would
like
be different.
groceries
It
and
was
gas and
just
things like
getting
that.
it.
Designer
Attention.
purses,
No,
cars,
not quite.
stuff like
No,
that.
not quite.
We didn't
That
have
might
that. We didn't have
encourage
that
it.
money.
You didn't have the resources.
No, we did
But
not
that
have the
would that
resources.
would encourage people to take an interest, or get a free ticket in the lottery or whatever, just to have a chance to participate.
That actually might be the way in which you end up getting people breaking the system and
cheating.
Yeah, let me see how many times I
Overcount.
can enter.
But the net of all of this is that it's
Good for
really
Harris County.
expensive. It's really
very
expensive.
expensive.
How do you convince somebody to fill out the census form when it's in their best interests? And if you throw incentives at them or you put people knocking on their doors, all of that costs money, and we don't have that money. So we have to get creative.
But if you're doing a campaign, knowing now that you're targeting some of the younger people, knowing now that people have access to the internet on their phones, this should be a way of incentivizing people. And then you package a giveaway, like Gary's saying, and it's like, should be like the kids say, butter.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
You just gotta pay for it.
58 million more for what you say, 1%?
Yeah, 58 million, but just 1%.
Surely we can find, $500,000, give away 10 nice cars in a lottery.
I'm sure we can. The problem is we'd have to have the census participating in order to confirm that people actually answered the census in order to qualify.
And they won't give you the data.
Yeah, unless we just
Not for
had
70
them.
years.
Unless we had them come in and sit down at our
Okay.
computers.
So much
and
for the
do it.
giveaway.
Well, you get the car in 70 years.
Yeah, there you
if
go.
you're still around. Okay, so let's talk about the prospects. You all have done a good job of outlining the importance and the significant challenges of the census. So what are the prospects we get a fair count in Southeast Texas?
Well, we have more challenges in some places, less challenges than others. We are going to get a count, and we are going to have a much higher population in the 2020 census than we did in 2010. And is it going to be perfect? No, it's not even going to be close. Is it going to be free of undercount? No, even though the motive force behind what I'm working on, Glenda Jo, her goal is to eliminate all the undercount. Erase the undercount is the goal. I'm afraid I'm a little more realistic. We are going to have an undercount. We're going to do everything we can to try and make sure that it's no more than an absolute minimum undercount. But it will be fair in the sense that everybody's going to be doing the same kinds of efforts, unless the Russians hack us and the whole thing goes.
Is that
down.
good or bad, though, if they hack?
If the Russians hack
If they're
us,
trying to help
if
us.
it goes,
really?
if it
That's
goes,
a possibility.
if it goes down, the whole thing goes down. I suppose we would have to start over again, wouldn't we?
I have no idea what would happen, but I think this is an impossibly difficult project. This is an impossible to win situation. Oftentimes when I think about the mayor of Houston, it's an impossible job. Taking on the undercount is, if you get it right, then you count everybody and you've done your job, and that's the goal. You can't go beyond that. You can't, hit a home run. So it's a very it's a very hard project to take on, but it's so important that it's worth it.
So one of the things that's often not talked about is the fact that in 2010 census, Hispanics accounted for 65% of the state's growth. What are we looking at this time?
I haven't seen an analysis of the population projections that breaks down by ethnicity, but I don't know that it would be any reason to think it would be significantly different. The Census Bureau does have information about the components of the migration to, for instance, the Houston metropolitan area. And for the 7 years that they've measured so far in this decade, it is roughly 50% domestic within the United States and 50% international, which would also include continental Africans and Asians, of course, but significantly Hispanic. But for the last year, it was significantly more international than domestic. So we should expect that a significant majority, I would say, it almost has to be a majority, of the population growth in Texas will be Hispanic.
Mm-hmm.
When are these census forms coming to us in the mail? When should people look to see it?
I think they arrive in March.
Yeah.
Of next year.
Of next year.
Mm-hmm.
So they got a year to get ready. Mm-hmm. Hopefully there'll be a car lottery for people.
I like it.
I did want to ask you this, Jeff. What is January Advisors?
We're a data science consulting firm, so we work with data like census data to help governments and nonprofits make sense of the world, the outcomes of policies.
Very good. And Jerry, how long has Erase the Undercount initiative been around?
Well, we started talking about it in 2007, 2007 for the 2010, but anticipating this issue would be still here for 2020. We started talking about it in about 2018. And it is, in fact, a shoestring operation driven...
Grassroots.
Yes. Tell Glenda Jo I said hi.
Yeah.
Okay.
driven by the implacable and relentless Glenda Jo, who
Yes. Okay.
is absolutely committed to try and make sure that we get as good a count as possible, and then she can retire.
Well, but that's not going away. I mean, we still got 2030 census to worry about too, Jerry.
Well, we all are. We all are aging in place, as they say.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Jerry Wood, Jeff Reichman, and Sonny Messiah-Jiles. It's always a pleasure. We've learned a lot about the census and why it's important. Folks, when you get your census forms, fill them out. We'll be back next week with another show on Red, White, and Blue.